choice, but mom's heading to the house. Yeah, heading to the big house. What's that?
I'm going to the
Are you really?
I don't miss you too.
We tailgate at what's called Bell Field, just so you know. So. What?
Maybe I'll see you in this next.
Maybe. Okay, so in the video, a group of all individuals who share something in common is called a population. So the thing with the population, and what I liked about the video is she kind of talked about how a population can be defined at different levels. Okay, if I was concerned about all high school students in the United States, that could be my population. Okay, and then L'Anse Creuse might be a subset, or maybe I'm concerned only about high school students in L'Anse Creuse, and that's my population. And now MST is my subset. Okay, the population is defined as, you know, whatever the large group is that you're trying to learn about, and then the sample is one small portion of that population. So the characteristic of a group that we are interested in is called a statistic, or excuse me, a parameter. Population goes with parameter. We estimate an unknown value by taking a small slice, which is called a sample. And the number calculated from that is the statistic. Okay, and that's what she was saying. Just think about the P's go together. Population goes with a parameter, and a sample goes with a statistic. So basically, when you could calculate a mean. Okay, the mean of the population is called the parameter. The mean of the sample is called the statistic. And it goes back to, do you remember at one point I talked about how you can use the Greek letter mu for mean? It's called mu when you're talking about the population. It's called X bar when you're talking about the sample. Your standard deviation, it's called sigma when you're talking about the population. It's called S when you're talking about the sample. Okay, so people have asked me along the way, it's like, how do I know whether I should call it mu or X bar? It has to do with whether it is the value from the population or just a sample. All right, so why do you think the people making calls for a survey have to stick to a script when they ask the questions? Why do you think they have to stick to the script? Absolutely. Okay, you have to. It literally, when they ask, I don't know if you were paying attention and listening to them, some of them are talking, it sounded almost like monotone. That's purposeful. Okay, if even changing your inflection could change an emphasis of a word and might trigger something that you are unaware of for the other person. Okay, so you have to stick to a script, changing your dialogue may affect responses. For polls to be accurate, it's crucial that the sample they take is truly random. Now, yes, you want it to be random, but I'm also going to include another R word. I'm going to call it representative. It has to be representative of the population. If I was interested in all high school students in L'Anse Creuse public schools, should you be my sample? No. Okay. The fact that you are here at MST because you wanted to take extra AP classes or what, you probably don't represent the characteristics of every high school student in L'Anse Creuse. Okay. You are a unique slice. Okay. So you could be considered a sample of all L'Anse Creuse high school students, but you are not a good representative sample by any stretch. Okay. How does the narrator describe a convenience sample? And she talked about friends and family. And I also use the word proximity. A convenience sample is just, if you guys needed to collect some data, if I had given you an assignment and you forgot to do it and you just ask everybody on the bus on the way to school in the morning or the way to MST, okay? Or you walk into the commons like, oh my God, I forgot to collect my data. Okay, you're doing a convenience sample because you are just doing anyone who's close to you right there, okay? A voluntary sample is literally what it's called. You ask for volunteers, okay? when you have, when you put survey, you see people sometimes on Facebook, they, or Twitter, or Instagram, they put something like, oh, answer my survey. Okay. Yes, that's convenient for them, but that would be considered a voluntary sample because people are volunteering to do it. Okay. You put it out there and then people just do it if they feel like it. All right. So they're volunteering to help you out. The thing with voluntary samples is basically, in general, we'll talk about this more, and I'm just going to write strong opinions. Typically, that's what happens is when there's a voluntary survey, they'll do this on the news and stuff. You ever see it? They'll say, hey, how do you feel about this? Phone in or log on to our website and vote. Okay, usually it's people who have a strong opinion one way or the other are the only ones who take the time to do it. Otherwise, you're like watching TV, you're like, I don't feel like getting up. Okay, oh, my phone's over there, I don't feel like going to get it. Unless it's something you really feel strongly about, and then you're going to say, okay, I'm going to go do that. Okay. Both of these sampling methods can produce biased results. And when we talk about biased results, and we'll talk more about all the stuff through the notes, but biased results generally means that your results are not going to represent your entire population. They're biased because they're going to sway in one direction or the other. And the example they use, one of the most famous ones in the study of statistics, was the 1936 presidential election poll. And the whole idea was Literary Digest was a pretty upscale magazine at the time. And their readership and the people who took the survey tended to be wealthier people. And they did this phone survey. And back in 1936, not everyone had phones. The only people who did were the wealthy. Okay, and traditionally speaking, which political party tends to get linked to the wealthier? Which political party, Republicans or Democrats, tend to get linked more towards the blue collar? Republicans generally are linked historically. Republicans were wealthy. Democrats were the ones who were pro-union, blue collar workers and things like that. And that's exactly what happened here. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a Democrat who was, he helped pull us out of the Depression and started all the programs, to help help the people who, need to get back on their feet. But since Literary Digest did a phone poll, they got all these results from people who were wealthy, and they were all voting for the Republican. And so according to their survey, it was going to be Alf Landon. And as it turned out, it was a complete landslide in the other direction. They did not have a good representative sample. Okay, so they had a poor sample. In fact, we're going to talk about there's sampling error and then there's non-sampling error. They were guilty of sampling error. They made their mistake in how they conducted their sample. Now, once you conduct your sample, even if you do it correctly, there could still be things that go wrong. Then we call that non-sampling error. We're going to talk more about that. All right, and then we're going to talk about this thing called a stratified random sample. In this case, the entire population is divided into groups that are called strata or strata, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And that's plural, singular is stratum, I believe, or stratus. But what you do there is, if you believe that there might be separate pockets in your population that are going to feel differently, then what we do is we say, okay, let's separate them first, and then we'll randomly select from this group, and then I'll randomly select from this group, okay? That would be like if I was trying to do something with all of the high school students in L'Anse Creuse. If I felt like the students from L'Anse Creuse and the students from L'Anse Creuse North, if I felt like they might have totally different opinions on something, I might stratify. I might say, okay, I'm going to go to L'Anse Creuse and I'm going to take a random sample there, and then I'll go to LCN and I'll take a random sample there, as opposed to if I lumped you all together, could I randomly, if I chose 50 high school students, is it possible that all 50 of them, if I lump you all together, is it possible that I get all 50 that came from one building? It could be. If I just made a list of all of you and I picked 50 names, I'd like to think I get half and half, but it's possible I might randomly pick 50 names and they're all answers. Okay, then I'm going to get a bad sample. So in a stratified random sample, we say, okay, let's pre-separate and then we'll randomly sample from each so that we make sure we get a good random sample. And you can keep divvying it up. You can say, okay, I'm going to go to both buildings. And then I'm going to make sure I get some 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders from each building. Oh, maybe I want to do males versus females. And maybe I want to do MST versus non-MST. You can do all these breakdowns. Okay, but then you get into the challenge and the expense, because every time you break it down further, it makes that selection process take longer. Okay, so, all right. We sample from a population to conduct statistical inference. Okay, the whole idea of doing this is, if it's possible, if I wanted to find out how students of L'Anse Creuse High Schools felt about something, how many students you guys have in each building right now? What do you have, like 2,000 in each? Something like that, maybe a little over, 2,200. I don't even know how big your buildings are anymore. Okay, let's just make an easy number, 2,000 each. Okay, so if I could get to all 4,000 of you and ask you my questions, well then cool, I really will know how you guys feel about something. The issue is it's not always feasible, okay? And that's why we do sampling. We're like, okay, I can't get to all 4,000 of them. I'm gonna try to get to 100 of them. I'll try to get to 50 in each building, okay? The whole idea is if we ask only 50 of you, that if we have a good sample, we can now come back and say, okay, if I had asked all 4,000, I think proportionally this is how they would have felt. Okay, that's called inference. We take a look at a small subgroup and we then draw those conclusions for the larger group. But you can only do that if you have a good sample, okay? So the first thing, poor sampling techniques. And Pardee Sabeti talked about this, the convenience and the voluntary sample, okay? It's done all the time because they're easy, okay? They're cheap, they're easy, they are unreliable. Both likely will produce biased results, and biased results specifically means that the results systematically is the word that's typically used, systematically lean in one particular direction or the other. And by the word systematically, I think what most textbooks and websites mean by that is it's almost like continually. Okay, systematically, back to the Landon poll. Okay, there was bias because the results continually kept leaning towards the Republican and we weren't getting enough representation from the Democrats, okay? In the video, the narrator said there was bias in favor of Landon. When you describe potential bias, okay, anytime you're asked to describe bias, you generally want to include, if it's possible, sometimes it's not, if you're asked certain questions in your book or on the AP test, if you are able to describe the direction of the bias, that you could have said, for example, on that one, you would have said, there was definitely bias in the way the survey was handled. And the bias was that because more Republicans were surveyed, the results seemed to lean more towards Landon and underrepresented the Democrats. You want to definitely describe who's being overrepresented versus who's being underrepresented. Okay, it's not always possible, but if you can, do it. All right, in each situation, identify the population and the sample. Then state the sampling method that is used. Explain how each method could lead to bias, indicating direction if you can. All right, so the student government at a high school surveys 100 of the students' space in the cafeteria to get their opinions about a change to the bell schedule. All right, so who's the population here? Well, if they're surveying 100 of the students in a high school, I'm assuming the population would be all students at the high school. And the sample would be the 100 students that they surveyed. Hmm, 100 students in the cafeteria. What kind of sampling method is this, by the way? That is definitely a convenience sample. And kind of think about the proximity thing. It's real easy for the surveyor to stand in the cafeteria, stand at the door, or if they have to walk around the cafeteria table to table. Still, they're all in one area. All right, so we might not be able to indicate the direction of the bias. But how is this going to, how are we going to possibly underrepresent some of our population by doing it like this? How is it possible that we might underrepresent certain subgroups in our population if we just go to the cafeteria and first 100 people we ask? Because in some ways it sounds pretty random, isn't it? Just in the cafeteria. How many lunches you guys have at your building? 3? For a while, they used to even run a D lunch, I think, at one of the buildings. They had to run a D lunch. It got so crowded. You understand that all of a sudden, if you have a lunch and so you're asking people during your lunch, guess who never got an opportunity to get asked? All the B lunch, all the C lunch. Okay, to be a truly representative random sample, I already mentioned this, every individual has to have an equal opportunity to be part of that survey. If you just walk into your lunchroom, that seems pretty random to you, but you now are not giving people in the other 2 lunches an opportunity to be selected. And fact is, it's not even just every individual, it's every subgroup of individuals. So like, look, if you're getting 100 people, okay, you have to think about every possible combination of 100 people. Okay, if you have 2,000 in your building, maybe it's students 1 through 100 in the list. Maybe it's students 1 through 99 and then student number 101. Every group of 100 has to have an equal chance of being selected. And if you're only in A lunch, B and C lunch, they're out of luck. Okay, so I'm not sure I can give the direction of the bias, but I could definitely say that it's biased because not all students have an opportunity to be surveyed. If they, who? Yes, that is true. Now, if you were in a school, yes, that literally had one giant lunchroom, okay, one giant lunchroom, okay, and you just ran, but even that, is it truly random when you just walk around? Maybe if you're standing at a table, who sits at a table together? A whole bunch of friends, right? So all of a sudden, are you asking too many of one clique and not enough of another one? You know, everyone has to have an opportunity. And this is way back before your time, but the high schools used to have what was called open lunch. Did you know that? Years and years ago, like you go out for lunch. Juniors and seniors could go out for lunch. So all of a sudden, if you're in the cafeteria, guess who's getting underrepresented? All your upperclassmen, because they're all out at McDonald's and Taco Bell. Okay? So these are all the things. And on the AP test or my test, Michaela, great question on it, because I do want you to understand some of these might not have one right or wrong answer. You might have to, it might just say, describe what bias might be involved. Come up with something, okay? Come up with something. There might be more than one type of bias, but come up with something that just makes sense. All right, it has been a tumultuous, there's a good word for you. There's a vocab word. Do you know what that means? Tumultuous? Crazy, chaotic, yes. Okay, it's been a crazy time for politics. And many people in the U.S. are more interested than ever in presidential approval ratings. Several news agencies like Fox and CNN offer online polls for various topics each week. Suppose one of the questions asked was, do you approve of the direction the president is taking our country? So looking for approval ratings. Okay, so who's our population? Who would you say the population is here? Yeah, I think we're just talking about people in the U.S., right? Yeah, U.S. citizens, people in the U.S. All right. Who will our sample be? Pardon? All right, yeah, so the sample, all of a sudden, the sample is going to be the people who watch each show. This is going to be voluntary then. And you understand the bias that's involved now is, since your sample is just the people watch that show, I mean, generally speaking, most of you know Fox News. Okay, instead of saying Democrat, Republican, let's go the other words, liberal, conservative, Fox News. Okay, they generally cater towards the conservative edge, and CNN, they generally go a little bit more liberal. Okay, if you ask me, neither one is right. Okay, to me, the news should be someone just reports news. Okay, there shouldn't be a slant when you watch the news, but both of these actually are very slanted. Okay, so it's going to be a voluntary response, and it's going to be biased in a direction based on the news agency. Okay, so if the survey is on Fox, okay, the results are going to probably sway towards or bias towards conservative opinions. If you have a survey on CNN, the results are probably going to be biased towards liberal opinions. Okay, in general, not always. All right, preferred sampling technique. So the simple random sample. Now the thing on the simple random sample is every individual or subgroup of individuals have an equal chance or opportunity of being selected. Okay, a totally random sample. If I wanted to survey L'Anse Creuse Public Schools high school students, again, let's say there are 2,000 students at each building. If I got all your names on slips of paper, I got 4,000 slips of paper, and I fold them all up and I put them into a big bin, and I just reach in and draw out 100 names. That is a totally simple random sample. Okay, I could number everyone from 1 to 4,000. I could pull out my calculator and I could say I want to generate 100 names from 100 numbers from 1 to 4,000, and I could let my calculator give me 100 unique numbers. Those are my students. That's a simple random sample. Everybody had an opportunity to be selected. But again, the problem with the simple random sample is, would it still be possible, even if it's not likely, would it be possible that all of my names came from one building or the other? Yes. Could it be possible that all the names I got were all MST students? Okay, not highly likely, but it's possible. So the simple random sample is not always considered the best, because you still might be underrepresenting a subgroup. If there are certain subgroups that you're concerned about, that their opinions or feelings might differ, okay? If you literally just said, you know what, I don't care, I just want their opinions, then do it. They call it the SRS. Do an SRS. But as the researcher, if you right away said, I want to ask them about their feelings about the math curriculum. And I think the MST students might have a different opinion on math than a typical high school student. Then you stratify. Then you come back and say, okay, so I'm going to separate my MST students. Okay, so I'm going to take my 400 MST students. I'm going to put their names in this bin, and I'll put the other 3,600 names in this bin. And then what I'll do is I'll take a simple random sample out of here and a simple random sample out of here, because now I know it's still random, but now I know I'm getting opinions specifically from regular high school students and getting opinions from MST. Okay, so a stratify means you subdivide the population ahead of time. So you subdivide first into homogeneous strata. Okay, homogeneous means you have pre-identified that there's certain characteristics that make that subgroup unique or similar. I think the MST kids might have a similar opinion on math and science. So I'm going to keep them separate. Okay. Now the cluster sample, Hardy didn't talk about. Some people will confuse the cluster sample with a convenience sample, because you do often do it for convenience purposes. But what a cluster sample does is you subdivide the population into heterogeneous regions. And then you randomly select regions, however many you want. All right, so this would be like, you ever see a map of Michigan and they have it broken down that you can see all like the counties, and they have like maps like this. They have all little counties. Okay, I don't know how many counties Michigan has. I'm going to make it up. Let's say we have 52 counties. Okay, so then what you might do is this would be called a cluster sample. You might say, okay, there are 52 counties. They're my clusters. And I'll say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to randomly pick 5 out of the 52. You're like, oh, I picked Wayne County. Oh, I picked Isabella County. Oh, I picked Kent County. Okay, so you pick your 5 counties, and then what you do is you survey everyone in that county. So you randomly pick your clusters. Now, but the thing is, that's not even a really great example, because they're supposed to be heterogeneous, which means they're supposed to be all different. That you would be saying that in every county, each county has a good mix that would represent the entire state. So you're saying in Wayne County, do I have some underprivileged individuals? Do I have some wealthy individuals? Do I have people of color? Do I have white Caucasians? Do I have the same thing like that in Kent County? So do I have a good mix that represents all of Michigan? So stratified, I always think of the word letter S. You want to break things apart so that they're the same. So you break it apart into the homogeneous strata. And a cluster means you literally just grab subgroups and you hope each subgroup is different, but different in the same way that the population is different. Okay? All right, real fast, we'll finish this and we'll be done. All right, suppose I need to select a group of students from my Algebra 2 class. Which description is an SRS, which is stratified, and which is cluster? I put the names of all my Algebra 2 students in a hat, and I randomly draw 4 names. That is your simple random sample. Now, think about it, though. The problem is, could I now have all 4 students are Lance Cruz? Yes. Could they all 4 be in my 6th hour? They could. Okay, so that might not be the best method. Each table is numbered, so table 1, table 2, table 3, table 4. And then I randomly select 2 tables. The 4 students at those tables are now my sample. That's your cluster right there. So each table was the cluster. So I would then have 15 clusters, but I pick only 2 of them, and now I have my 4 students. And I put all the boys in one hat and all the girls in another. That's your stratified, where I have decided that the girls and the boys are already different, so I want to keep them separate. All right, so we did get through part 1. Oh my gosh, I gave you 5 questions. You could do it. Okay, we did get through part 1.
All right, Madison, you guys in the doghouse today?